Director George Nolfi brings us Elevation. And this one stars Anthony Mackie, who you may know as the new Captain America, and Morena Baccarin. And this is a kind of science fiction action movie, very similar in a way to The Quiet Place. So this takes place after an emergence from underground creatures have come up and wiped out 95% of the human race. The surviving humans are now living in the kind of the mountains because these creatures won't go past 8,000 feet sea level. So that's the only kind of safe haven, and these creatures seem to be almost indestructible with kind of an armoured like hide. They're sort of a cross between a giant saber-toothed tiger and a scorpion. So we have these small communities living above 8,000 feet, but there's resources are limited, and there's that, you know, obviously has its problems living in that kind of high altitude. And we follow Anthony Mackie's character, who is a father who needs to get some supplies for his son, who has a medical condition. So he is forced to travel below the safe zone to try and go to this hospital so he can get some supplies. Along the way, he takes a couple of women with him who agree to kind of help him for their own reasons, and off they set and obviously come face to face with a variety of these creatures. What'll happen? You'll have to watch the movie and find out. So yes, the setup is kind of quite similar to A Quiet Place. These creatures, they don't hunt by sound, but there is this thing where they can detect humans through when they exhale CO2, carbon dioxide. So that's the kind of the way that they hunt it, and by kind of visual as well. So we follow this trio of people as they kind of try and get to this hospital to get their bounty and what have you. What did I like about it? It's a relatively kind of like decent production value. I mean, it's made to be a streaming movie, but I've got to say I think it's fairly kind of well put together. It's very similar in a way to the same level of production that I would say you've seen in A Quiet Place. You know, you've got a couple of recognisable actors here. There's some pretty decent kind of action sequences. The creatures, although they're not on the screen massively loads, when we do see them, they're CGI creations that look kind of quite realistic and weighty, and they're rendered well. They seem genuinely kind of dangerous, and it has this kind of this high concept idea here where they can't go above kind of 8,000 feet. That's the only kind of safe zones, but to get to this hospital they have to go down the past that way. So I think there's some decent ideas here. Actually, as the film ends and we kind of get to the kind of the finale, I have to say there is a kind of quite interesting kind of reveal, and it certainly kind of sets it up as a sequel. You've got recognisable and experienced actors, and the movie really does focus on these two characters of Morena Baccarin and Anthony Mackie, and they are, experienced actors. So the acting is solid. There are a couple of other characters, but for the focus it is mainly on the kind of those two, and they do a good job here. And that there is a level of kind of tension. We get a few different kind of locales. We go into this kind of like these mines. There's the kind of the open space. There's inside buildings and stuff, and the VFX, as I say, look good. The action is relatively kind of solid. So it all comes across as, a fairly kind of well put together movie that does have a number of interesting kind of elements that it kind of leaves out. Why don't these things go above 8,000 feet? Things like that. Some of the stuff is never really explained, but you feel like it's kind of obviously going to be addressed maybe in a kind of a sequel. Yeah, so I think if you're an action kind of science fiction movie, you can do a lot worse with this. And I actually think this is a relatively kind of solid movie in, both in its production, its ideas, its acting, and the kind of VFX wise. I think it actually is pretty solid. What doesn't work, I mean, the movie is entirely predictable. I mean, maybe the one thing it does miss me really is it does seem quite derivative of a quiet place, even though that doesn't have that where you can't move the sound. I mean, instead we have this thing where you know it detects your your carbon dioxide as you exhale. But I thought that should be, I mean, I'm no scientist, but that to me seems like you'd be able to create something that would, you'd basically at least be able to contain your like exhaled breath or something like that. It didn't seem like it would be that much of a kind of a scientific leap to have some device where you breathe into it and it doesn't make, your CO2 kind of go everywhere. So, that to me was a little bit, I don't know if that kind of hook is quite as plausible or interesting as like a quiet places, these things pick up the slightest kind of sound. We have this reveal, which I think it's really the only thing I think that I was a little bit surprised with. I don't know if it entirely made sense. We'll see. This is very much going to be like, as the sort of if there is a sequel, that my mind might change about that. It's kind of a little bit like, it's kind of an interesting reveal. I don't know if I was completely buying it, but yeah, there is that. As I say, we don't sort of see the creatures all that much. I would have liked to have maybe a little bit more on screen. And I would say as well, this as well as being a little predictable, this kind of movie has these specific moments where you just feel like, come on. And there's one in particular towards the end, and it involves like a save, is all I'll say. And it's just like, how did that happen? That seems entirely implausible. And yeah, I don't know if I was kind of buying that. This the kind of like, again, the logistical side of things, the physics kind of side of things. And again, this is something that maybe in a sequel, so maybe I'll kind of walk back on this one. But these creatures, they'll literally go entirely up to 8,000 feet. And it's like, why that specific round number? It's not even if they kind of start kind of slowing down at, 7,555 or whatever. They're right up to the kind of like the 8,000. And it just seemed to me like, it seems such a weird cut-off. Surely these things might be a little bit, slowing down at least as they approach that kind of height. I mean, there is kind of like a quasi reason why that might be, and as I say, maybe this will be explained in the sequel. But even with the kind of the reveal that we get, I don't know if it, completely kind of satisfied my question about that one. So yeah, it's a very kind of enjoyable, watchable, if kind of somewhat unoriginal and maybe a little bit silly movie here and there. Doesn't quite escape the shadow from A Quiet Place, but is maybe a companion movie to that. I will say though, despite some faults I have with it, the general production is quite it's quite well paced, and I quite enjoyed the characters. The VFX, like the cinematography. I want to give it a 7 out of 10 because I had a good time with this one. Have you seen it? What did you think of it? Leave me a comment and I'll look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.